In this video, we're going to look at that next quadrant of the Wesleyan quadrilateral, that quadrant of history and tradition, this quadrant of understanding from the past and what the church has done and learned from other maybe introductions of technology, of how to maybe look at and understand digital technology for the future. But to do this, we need to start by defining technology. We've kind of done that a little bit already, but for this conversation, we really need to make this clear. So technology, want to be clear, is not just somehow new forms of technology. It's always the challenge. It's not simply the kind of the new digital device or now artificial intelligence or whatever it will be when you're watching this video. It can be something as simple as a fork or a knife, or something as simple as a saddle for a horse. All of these things, which are technically forms of technology that now we take as common day things. So we have to be careful that we don't associate the term technology with simply new, for example. So let's kind of articulate that. So technology is then, by definition, as the great media theorist and fellow Canadian Marshall McLuhan would say, anything that extends our reach, as a simple definition. And we can reach for good things or for bad things. As we've seen in previous videos, we can reach for things in a way to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, or mind, strength. We can reach for things that aren't that. We can reach for ways that pursue God's mission, and we can you can reach for things that don't pursue God's mission. And we can use technology as an extension from both of those elements, both for the Great Commandment, for example, or against the Great Commandment, or for the Great Commission, or against the Great Commission. Technology has the capacity to do both. It's amoral. And all of which are the nature of what does it mean then to extend our ability as part of being made in the image of God to use technology to that end. So whether that's in clothing or utensils or tools or weapons or ships or cars or books or even the internet, all of these things can be used in the furtherance of God's kingdom or away from it. So how the church then has adopted and used technology in the past is a deep and important question for us to discuss, because we can learn from well-worn paths that often the church has kind of run or been in when it comes to the introduction of technology, to learn about maybe how we adopt or don't adopt, or learn about what questions we should use or not use, or more importantly, to understand and learn about potential challenges or potential obstacles or potential kind of ditches that the church has gone into with other forms of technology that we actually might be susceptible to when it comes to using now new forms of technology, like digital technology for digital discipleship. This is the nature of it. And the church has historically, in any new form of technology, combined both excitement and suspicion with the introduction of certain things, right? So we've seen this already in our common world today when it comes to digital technology. There's sometimes an excitement, and we'll talk about that. And there's sometimes a suspicion. Many of us are familiar with that. But this is not a new thing. This is a well-worn path when it comes to the introduction of technology in the church. And so we can learn from that third form of technology, as we think through the methodology for how we understand digital technology and our evaluation of it, this well-worn path that we can learn from. And so think of some of the introductions of different forms of technology from the past that might give us a glimpse of how we think through and reflect on and evaluate digital technology. The first is the printing press. This invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg allowed the mass production of the Bible and other religious texts. And it kind of launched the Reformation and other things as a result of this. And when this happened, and now everyone had a copy of the physical text for themselves, instead of having to go to the church and either see the stories on the stained glass windows or to hear it being read publicly in a very limited supply of those books or those scrolls from earlier on. Now that it was in the hands of all people, these were the concerns that existed in society as a whole. And maybe you'll hear about this when it comes to the internet and digital technology. It's going to make people more stupid. People are going to be able to, how are they going to know things? They're not going to be able to memorize anything. They don't have to memorize anything anymore because they can read it. And then people were reading huge chunks of the religion, or memorizing huge chunks of the religious texts, now no longer needed in the same way. And that accusation that somehow that they were going to make everybody stupid, and the church was going to be filled with people who did not know their Bibles. that somehow it would be loss of authority in the church, that there'd be heretical teachings everywhere because no longer does now the church hierarchy get to determine what's being said or not said. Individuals get to read and interpret for themselves. Now, some of those things might be true. Most of those things are not, but I guarantee you this, you will not find a pastor out there that will say, you know what, I think I'm going to do ministry, but I'm not going to use books. Like my personal library of books, whether that's digital or physical, not needed. That's kind of a useless thing. And in fact, maybe that actually is more problematic than anything else. Of course not. Every pastor would say you need books to be an effective pastor or minister. I think that's a thing that we need to recognize looking ahead in how we evaluate digital ministry, because sometimes I hear the same thing. I don't need to embrace any of that. It's just going to make people stupid. They don't have to know anything. They can just look it up and they're going to be able to find their own community out there and be able to find their own kind of groups of people that they know and they're friends with. All of those things I think have happened before in the past. And so just as we're looking at the future and evaluating the nature of digital ministry, we just need to be cautious of that going forward. This is a well-worn path, and the church has experienced those same challenges in the past as we are going into the future. The second example is that of the pipe organ, or to be fair, we could put any other new form of musical expression. The use of pipe organs in churches provided a way to enhance worship services with music and creating a more immersive and inspiring experience. And the church had lots of concerns about this, right? Whether it create a distraction in worship services, and now the secular is somehow invading the sacred. This is always the challenging concerns, and yet most of us would see pipe organs as kind of innocuous. Like, oh, is it actually a challenge or not a challenge to the church? It's kind of just whatever, and yet at the time, it was super controversial. So just a reminder that these new forms of technology always creates a bit of controversy, and they're not unusual until they are just normative. Another example is mechanical clocks. Churches and cathedrals housed the most advanced mechanical clocks of their time, and it helped regulate daily life and religious practices. It also kind of helped move forward in the Industrial Revolution and the nature of how people understood time and work life. But there was lots of concerns with the mechanical clocks that started actually with the church. And it was about, it's going to take away all the marking of time, that religious calendars and seasons and those prayer times throughout the day, all of that was marking those times were going to go away with this introductions of the mechanical clock. None of us would argue that we should get rid of clocks, but at the time, super controversial, and there was thought about just ignoring it and moving on. This is also seen in even closer time to us than those things, the nature of a radio broadcast, where churches began using radio to broadcast sermons and religious services, reaching a wider audience beside those physically present in the church. And at the time, and many of you were around then, if not like on the cusp of where we are today, there was the kind of the pushback and the concern that there would be a loss of personal connection and community and worship. And yet many of us would embrace some form of radio broadcast or podcasts or kind of internet, kind of be able to stream a service as being just something that you do now. But at the time, hugely controversial when it was introduced. That's the nature of tradition and history. We can learn a lot from it. And primarily what we learn is that most of the challenges we have and many of the critiques that we hear today aren't new to this form of technology. That has always been the case. But I want to suggest that as we look into the future and think about how we understand and reflect on those past experiences of those other forms of technology, there's ways that we can think about that to be able to create a kind of a pathway forward that learns from the past and doesn't necessarily repeat all of those mistakes. And I use the words, the weight and the the weight and the how to be able to facilitate that conversation. And I do it through the conversation of Pentecost. So if you remember the Pentecost story from even our previous video, I think the Pentecost story provides the corrective to our pragmatic impulses with technology. All of those things, of those examples that we have read, all follow from those same patterns of people critiquing it right away or somehow jumping into it right away without reflecting on it before they use it wholeheartedly and think about what they're doing as they're doing it. And so I want us to look at the story of Pentecost and look at those two things of the wait and the how, and what it might tell us about digital technology in the future, learning from history and tradition. So if you remember the story of Pentecost, God's Spirit comes on the church after Jesus' ascension. Jesus tells the church to go and wait to the upper room, and they go and wait. They wait for days. I imagine the church is wondering why they can't go and do what Jesus has called them to do, is to make disciples of all nations as Jesus has commanded them. And now they're stuck to wait, and they're waiting in an upper room, and they don't know what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. And all of a sudden, on the day of Pentecost, the Spirit of the living God falls on the church. And that wait of them waiting in prayer for what to do then gets moved to the how. And the how is important because that how shifts everything for how the church does God's mission. The church goes out and it tells all of the different people, the Jewish community who have come from all the corners of the Roman Empire, who speak all different languages, all descending upon the city of Jerusalem in the perfect moment in time in God's sovereignty and goodness and grace. All have come to Jerusalem, and all of these voices being heard in the language of the people tell them, the scriptures say, of the wonders of God. That's the quote. Now, think about this for a second. God could have done two things here. He could have empowered all the people to hear the language, to hear it in their language. But no, God empowers the church to speak the language of the people. Like, this isn't a kind of by chance. This is by God's beautiful design. The how is so important. God empowers the speaker, not the hearer, right? And uses technology, voice, to be able to do this. This can't be ignored in our temptation towards a colonial missiological approach, because this happens all the time with new technology. Whether it's a boat and the ability in commercial shipping vessels in kind of the colonial times of the church getting on board and using that technology and basically bringing a culture to a people and not asking whether they should, they just do. In all of their pragmatic impulse to be able to bring the good news of Jesus, they do that without thinking about the how. Or whether that's when it came to using digital ministry after the pandemic. And you might remember this, I do, the pivot instantly. This is a great story of the dynamic of the challenge of not waiting on the what or the when and the how. Think about this for a second. The wait is so important, and what we skipped in our pragmatic impulse and our desire to do this so fast. We shifted overnight from in-person to online, and we did that without thinking about the how we were going to do it. We just figured we have to, we've got to, we did it, and we did it fast. In fact, if anyone says the church can't change, they didn't live through the pandemic, because the church changed faster than any industry on the planet, because it saw the nature of the need to gather so important. It did it in digital space in record time. The church adapted, the church changed. It did it because it felt it had to, but it didn't necessarily reflect on what it was doing. It didn't think about the culture it was going into. It just did everything it was doing in person and did it in digital space, not recognizing that digital space is different space. And it just did it and didn't think about the how. In many ways, and this is a bit controversial, but in many ways, they practice kind of digital colonialism. We did it because we could, and we just brought a different culture into a different space, and surprised it didn't work very well. It's the challenge of how do you do digital ministry, digital discipleship, what my colleagues will talk later about in the experience section. But this is why the wait and the how is so important, and what church history and tradition teaches us. For example, the wait, we need to recognize, let us not become so immediate in either our full adoption or our full exclusion of technology that we don't think about what we're doing. We need to stop and wait and consider. And then the how. We need to consider how we're doing what we're doing, and to think about what are best practices to do this. How do we do this in a way that meets people where they are at, and not somehow skip ahead of them or just do what we've always done. The how is also so important, because we don't want to simply be technophobes or Luddites, if you will, and ignore technology. And we don't want to simply be technophiles and jump full steam ahead without thinking about it. We want to do what the media ecologist Neil Postman says. We want to be technocritical. We want to think about the how of what we're doing so that we can do things in a way that are effective. We can do things in a way that meet people in their culture and in their means and share in a way that's respectful of them. These are all things that we're invited to. So when it comes to digital discipleship, it is so important to see it in context with all of history so that we can practice it effectively and we can leverage all of the history that we have to be able to help people right where they're at in a way that makes sense to them. What is new and foreign often becomes normative and common, right? So may we not somehow think that digital technology is something we should avoid, but instead recognize it's something we should embrace. Because it's new and foreign for us today, doesn't mean it will always be so. It's in its beginning stages. It will develop, it will evolve, it will become more nuanced. Most forms of technology have, and we've adapted, and humanity has adjusted, and the church has adapted. So my encouragement is that digital technology is there for us to use, just as the church always has, but we need to do that in a way that waits to learn and understand, and then do it in a way that's effective moving forward with good practices and in a way that's effective. So join with me and my colleagues as we now talk about how then do we do this? How then do we embrace that through our experience and do that with the best practices that we can to move forward digital discipleship into the future?